So, Rabbi, do you believe in the afterlife? Of course I do. I'm a rabbi. I mean, how else am I going to convince anybody to do something? If there's an afterlife, then you should want to do a mitzvah, you should stay away from sin, etc. How about a before life? That's what I want to address today. We talk about afterlife, but let's talk about before life. See, in recent times, we've begun to question both the beginning of life and the afterlife, and the end of life. The end of life, we question euthanasia. What if a person's really sick? I mean, the amount of times that I'm sitting in a hospital and I'm seeing a person suffer, and I'm like, Hashem, either give the guy health or take them. I mean, this is just such pain. Yeah, so euthanasia is a real question, obviously not from a halachic perspective, but people have begun to question, like, is this an ending of life? And we've begun to question the beginning of life, abortion. So interesting that both those stages are very strong political debates. So there's no question that when we come in an interesting transition, and when we leave in an interesting transition. Sometimes it's a shocking death, but oftentimes it's a natural, slow progression towards death. But again, we're not focusing on death, we're focusing on birth. Is there a before life? In other words, for 9 months, the baby's in the mother's womb, and they're turning from a tiny, microscopic egg into a full-fledged 3-4 kilo baby in 9 months' time. And then poof, they give birth, and now they're breathing on their own, and they're eating on their own, etc. So where does the baby come from? Okay, you'll say sperm and egg. But if you've had a child, I believe most of you had, you'll have to agree that you'll find that hard to get your head around that your sperm or your egg is what made the human being, and that's the be-all and end-all of the human being. The entire life is just microscopic particles from a male and a female that create a child. I can't get my head around that. And I don't believe most of us really, even if we claim to believe it, I don't think we actually believe it. It's impossible to imagine that an entire life comes from pretty much nothing. So where does the baby come from? Where do human beings come from? Where do we come from? Instead of only asking where we're going, in other words, is there an afterlife? Do we go somewhere, or, once we're dead, and we're just nothing. We're just memories. I think that it's even easier to get your head around a before life than an afterlife. At least for me. An afterlife, you could convince yourself, okay, the person had an accomplished life, and now pretty much it's done, it's over, it's gone, it's not going anywhere. But when you look at a baby and you say, wow, 9 months ago you were a nothing, and now you are a human being. Where are you coming from? You look at a baby's eyes, where's that wisdom coming from? Where's that beauty? Where's that holiness? You held the baby, you've held something pure. Where's that purity come from? Why are babies born so pure? I mean, if they're sperm and egg, then practically they should just be as coarse as the parents who created them. They should be as, if the parents are not refined people, then the baby will be born not refined. But have you ever seen a baby born that's not refined? Have you ever seen a baby that's not pure? Have you ever seen a baby that you just didn't feel such warmth and purity. Babies come from somewhere. And that silly question we ask, where do babies come from? And the bird and the bees talk. That's how babies are formed into this world. But ultimately, where do babies come from? From a beautiful, better place. They come from a place of purity. And then they come into this world. And slowly but surely, the world does a work on them, and they're not as pure. They're not as naive. Animals, people always say animals are born and very quickly they adjust to reality, very quickly. A few hours, a few minutes, maximum a few days. Right away, they just get into the zone and they're in. But babies, human beings, they don't right away form into reality very quickly. It's a very slow progression. And people will often say that the reason is because of evolution, whatever. When we were monkeys and we turned into human beings, at that stage it took an X amount of time for us to realize how to do stuff, etc. But the truth is, the reason, at least from a spiritual perspective, why it takes so long for babies to adjust to this reality is because they're coming from a different place. They're coming from a place of absolute purity, and they now have to adjust to an entire different reality. They're not just human beings coming from human beings. If they were lions coming from lions, humans coming from humans, then quickly they should adjust to it. But their slow adjustment is simply from the fact that this is a different world. They're coming from a different world. They just literally emigrated. Think of birth and death as emigration, from one reality to the next reality. When a baby's born, they are emigrating from a place of purity, a place of lack of temptation, innocence, to a place that is the world we live in, which is messy and complex, and innocence for too long is pretty dangerous. But yeah, for the first few years, baby runs around innocent. My 2-year-old runs around and pretty much is undressed, and you have to force the nappy back on them. And if they did it in 10 years from now, I would give them such a slap. But at 2, it is what it is. Why? Because there's an incredible innocence that's still there, and slowly but surely, we're taming it, right? We're trying to, teach the child how to be innocent, at the same time not be too innocent. From the youngest age, we're already teaching children, don't let people touch you, etc. Why? Because innocence is very scary in a world where you can't fully be protected. But the point is that we're coming from a different place. So instead of the conversation always being, is there an afterlife? I think the conversation ought to be, is there a before life? And I think it's very hard to argue there isn't. Now you're going to say, prove it. I can't. In empirical proof, I have never seen empirical proof that babies come from anywhere, but there's certain things in life that I believe proof is actually diminishing it. For example, you'll ask me, do you love your wife? And I'll say, yes. Prove it. I bought her flowers yesterday. Nah, come on. Empirical. That you love this person. That's just like really? Like, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. I was talking to an older teenager, somebody already, in marriageable age, so I guess in the 20s, and trying to make the mathematics of love. Well, I'm the third personality type, and according to the personality type, I'm supposed to meet personality type number 7, and we're supposed to build on each other, blah 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 blah, and etc. And that's the way everything turns out perfect. But at some stage you're like, oh, come on, man. Really? Is that really what's going to bring you love if you find the exact mathematical equation? Or something's just going to tell you it is? Prove it? I can't prove it. It just is. Prove that you and your parents are not just biologically connected, but there's a strong connection between the two of you. Well, you see, I believe, actually, that the stuff you have to prove or the superficial stuff of life. Something that's true, it just is. Proving it almost diminishes it. Like if I get in a conversation with you trying to prove there's a God, and I don't mind having the conversation. For me, it's almost it's like so patronizing. It's like, really, is that what it's come to? Like a scientific, prove me if the chemistry works, and prove me the economics of it. So I can't prove you there's a before life. But gosh, if you've held a baby and you don't think there's a before life, then you explain me what's going on. You can't prove it, but explain me. Explain me how and why babies come into this world so beautiful, so pure, so innocent. And when you look at the baby's eyes, do you really believe that they're just 1 minute old, or 9 months old, or whatever month you believe within the gestation period that the baby's now a baby? Really? There's a world we come from. And yes, there's a world we go back to, which is pretty much the same world, just more light. Because now that we spent years in this world and we refined ourselves and we fought within our character to become a better person, we get uplifted to a more spiritual space within that reality than where we started. But ultimately, where do we come from? And where do we go? Where we belong. This is unnatural for us. It's natural for us to be soul, to be spiritual, to not have ego, to be as innocent as a baby. But we come into this world and our body and society go through processes which slowly but surely make us believe that this is the reality, and now we start having philosophical conversations. Was there a before life, and what is there an afterlife? But this is the exception. These 80, 100 years that you're on this world, that's the exception. For all eternity, you were somewhere else. And for all eternity, you're going to be somewhere else. This isn't it. Okay, please God, when Mashiach comes, we're back here. But even then, it's an uplifted reality. The point is, believing that the world just is what you see, besides the fact that it makes God very bad, because that means there's no reward and punishment and there's no consequence, I just find it very unconvincing, even from an intellectual point of view, to sit there telling me that this is all there is and there's no reality other than what you see. There's no reality other than what you see. So there's no internet. No, but somebody could see it. Basically, I define reality based on what I can prove. The amount of people have told me recently, Rabbi, I will only believe in things I can prove. And for me, that's like, first of all, are you an Einstein? You can't even understand Einstein, and you think you can understand everything? And I'm not saying that's like I could understand. I'm saying this idea that we live with, that we could understand everything, and everything that doesn't make sense to us is in reality, is so patronizing. It's even if it's not intended that way, I find it egocentric. Really? Is your way of seeing reality the only way of seeing reality? Are the ancient people, the way they saw reality, we spoke about this previously, is their reality not valid? I was watching a talk where this fellow was talking about the ancient Greeks and how they believed in multiple gods and multiple realities, and very, very superstitious. So you might sit there saying as a modern person that they were false. How do you know? Now, obviously, I'm not talking about from a place of faith. I'm talking about from a place of, I'm a modern man and I see reality the way it is. And people who see reality differently, people who live in the far edge corners of China, or people who live, I don't know, a 10-minute drive away in a township, and they see reality from a different perspective, who says they're wrong? Because I see things through science? But who says that I'm seeing things through science? And first of all, how can you see things through science? Science is an ever-evolving technology. Science is something that's constantly changing every single day. If science was closed, even the principles of, if science was closed, then there wouldn't be 50,000 articles that are coming out every single day. Science is an evolving thing. As I saw this talk yesterday where this guy says, imagine after Newton we closed the book, there would be no Einstein. So this idea, I see the world through the eyes of science. What is science? The science of yesterday, the science of tomorrow. Judaism, faith, obviously it evolves in certain details, but the foundation never moves. Science, even the foundations move. The only thing that doesn't move is the scientific method. But the foundations of how we see reality, I mean, till 50 years ago, people believed that the world had no beginning. And it was not that people believed, science claimed, the greatest astrophysicists claimed the world, it was everlasting and it never began. Finally, science could prove that there was a Big Bang. And suddenly, that is no longer science. My point is, I'm not bashing science, I'm a very pro-science. But not science as a way of defining what reality is and what it isn't. Prove me empirically that the world exists. I mean, for crying out loud, science can't even explain the black holes, which is more than 90% of all reality. And you're expecting science at this stage to prove that there's a spiritual reality? Science has not even figured out physical reality. We know more about outer space than we know about the deep oceans. So saying I only believe in what's proven is actually very primitive. Because what do you actually believe in? You believe in whatever was proven until it's disproven? Is that is that the parameters of your faith? And you know for a fact that science will change in the next 50 years. So you could be guaranteed that in 50 years you'll believe in different stuff than you believe in now. And 50 years from that, if you live long enough, you'll believe in other stuff. In other words, you know for a fact that what reality is now is not going to be reality in 50 years. So why are you so tied up? And why are you so committed to see reality the way it is currently being scripted? Again, I'm not anti-science, but I believe that science is here to understand the world, not to define the world, not to give answers, but to look for questions, and in the process, try to find hypothesis. That's a scientific method, to find an hypothesis and try to prove it. But just because you prove an hypothesis doesn't mean it's truth. It just means that you proved an hypothesis. Until you prove an hypothesis which is even greater. That's what science is. It's a journey. It's a discovery. But to base your perception on, is there heaven? Is there hell? Is there spirituality? Is there God? Is there a soul? Is there deeper meaning? Is the Jewish nation a real thing? Did Sinai happen? Did the Exodus happen? All those things. If you're going to sit there basing it only on science, really? Which science? The science of yesterday or tomorrow? You know, we focus so much on giving our kids a good education. And part of the education we give them is secular education, mathematics, science, chemistry, biology, etc. And I have nothing against those subjects. On the contrary, they're all fascinating. For me, the problem with that is that we don't couch it with a very big caveat. My dear child, just because I'm teaching you that there is a way to understand the world through mathematics and through science, this isn't the only way to see reality. There's a lot of different ways to see reality. There is a spiritual way of seeing reality. There's an emotional way of seeing reality. Feelings, intuitions, following your gut, all that stuff is not scientific, it just is. And if you will only follow the reality based on the scientific method, you'll lose out on many other methods of living. It has to complement other ways of living, but you have to live with the spiritual method, the faith method, the kindness method, the emotional method, the self-awareness method, all that stuff which doesn't necessarily fit into quantifiable science, but just is. I've met too many people, especially recently, who they struggle to see beyond a very narrow reality. And they see people who believe, or people who are maybe more emotional versus intellectual, as people who are living outside the realm of truth, because the truth is very narrow. It's what's proven. And there's something very seductive about that. It sounds so intellectual, and it might come from a good place. But I would strongly argue that by living in such a narrow world, you are robbing yourself from so much more of what reality is. You know, some people might be more spiritual than others. I'm not talking about holy, like, you know, Jewish spiritual. I'm talking like spiritual energies. Now, for those of us who maybe not spiritual energy kind of people, we might look at them as crazy. And maybe sometimes people do go off the far end, but just because you don't see spiritual doesn't mean there isn't any spiritual. There's people that really tap into energy. There's people that really tap into the world of nature, into trees and into vegetation. They feel things. You might not. But just because you can't prove it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'll be honest, even between the genders, as a man, there's certain things I can't understand. Not I can't understand about a woman, that's you know, pretty obvious. We don't understand each other as genders. I'm saying, like, oh, my wife will have a certain intuition about something in a feminine perspective, and I won't get it. And I'll see something from a masculine perspective, and she won't get it. And it's not because we're bad, it's because we're seeing the world through different prisms. So which prism is correct, the male or the female? The feminine or the masculine? That's ridiculous. It's multiple perspectives. But it has to be proven. No, it doesn't. That's not the way life works. If it's scientific, it has to be proven. Now, does this mean every superstition should be accepted? No. It has to have some basis. It has to have a tradition. As Jews, we don't just sit there making up each day a new reality. Our tradition goes back thousands of years, and we trace it back to strong, you know, strong traditions, strong minds, and people who are grounded, etc. But what I want to impress on us today is to let go of this fantasy that this is all there is. It is such a... It is shortchanging us from so much more. And to be able to accept that just because I don't understand something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. On the contrary, if you understand it, that means it's extremely superficial. Because our minds are limited. I mean, how high, you know, the person that you know with the highest IQ, 130, 140, 150, really? You believe all reality can fit in that person's mind and frame of understanding? I mean, you can't even understand the other gender. You can't understand ancient cultures. You can't even understand the Chinaman. You can't even understand the person who lives 5 kilometers down. So then I ask you a simple question. Sorry. So if you can't even understand the other gender, you can't understand other people. Really? You have to understand God? I beg to differ. A little more humility in the way we think would do us good. Show up with humility. Show up with humility to knowledge. I'm never going to understand the theory of relativity the way Einstein did, no matter how many times I read it. I'm never going to understand it. And if I can't understand Einstein the way Einstein understood Einstein, I don't think I'll understand reality the way God does. Shkoyach, everybody. Thank you so much.